Defending Israel with David Harris is made possible in part by Barbara and Bob Goodkind, the Paul and Lynn Light Family Foundation, To Life, to Love, the Patricia Worthen Ullman Foundation.
Hello, JBS viewers. Welcome back to Defending Israel. I'm David Harris. On December 14th, just a few weeks ago, you'll recall that two ISIS-inspired shooters let loose on a large crowd celebrating Hanukkah on Bondi Beach in Sydney, Australia. The toll? At least 15 people were killed, some 40 were injured. One of those injured happens to be a friend of mine and a previous guest on the show twice, once in person and once via Zoom from his then home in Israel. He's here with us now from Sydney, Australia, Arsen Ostrovsky. Arsen, it's particularly good to see you.
Thank you, David. It's always a pleasure speaking with you and seeing you. And once again today, albeit under somewhat different circumstances, obviously, than the last few times.
Arsen, I hate to drag you back to December the 14th, but for the sake of our global audience, if you could walk us through where you were, where your family was, what happened, and the aftermath.
Sure. It's first of all, there's no need to apologize for that. It's seemingly post December 14th. My life in so many ways is pegged back to that day, so it is quite difficult to get away from it. But look, we had just moved from Israel about 2.5 weeks prior to the attack. We'd been living there. I've been living there for 13 plus years. My wife a little bit longer. We had two small children, and we'd just relocated back to Australia, where I was about to take up very shortly a position with the Jewish community in the Australia-Israel Jewish Affairs Council. And we had gone to Bondi, as anyone who knows Australia, and as you know very well, knows where Bondi is. It's one of the most iconic landmarks in the country. Beautiful, glorious beach with amazing atmosphere. And we had gone there to celebrate the first night of Hanukkah with hundreds of other families. This was a Hanukkah by the Sea celebration, which had been done annually for years and years. And we had gone there, me, my wife, our two small children, aged almost 5 and 9 years old, and we were there with everyone else, with our community. We were rejoicing. There were kids' rides, there were face painting, there was food, there was sufganiyah, there was pets. It was just a beautiful atmosphere. People were happy, people were smiling. And just before the ceremony was about to start, this was for the first night of Hanukkah, my wife and daughters had gone to sit down. And I just stepped aside for a moment to get some food. And as I'm getting the food, I hear this bang. And, your first reaction is not to think that this is some ISIS-inspired terrorists, but my first thought was this must be a balloon. There were kids' activities, there were clowns and so on. So I assumed at first it must have been a balloon, something innocent, but then understood very quickly that this was something else because it was relentless. It was bang, 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 bang. The fire was just going off really rapidly, and all of a sudden you started seeing people who were running. I saw people picking up their children and running. I saw people falling, David, to the ground. You saw smoke billowing from the grass, from the bullets, and I had found a small place where I could duck myself. And at this moment, the fire is still, it's bellowing bullets nonstop. But my first thought was, where is my wife? Where are my children? Where are they? I knew they were out in the open. And they would have been about 20 or so meters away from me, which meant there would have been about 20 or so meters closer to the shooter, and would have been in a completely open, exposed area. So I stood up. The bullets were still raining down. We didn't quite know from which direction, other than from every direction. It was absolute chaos. It looked like a war zone, but this wasn't Gaza or Israel or Middle East. This was Bondi Beach, Sydney. But the moment I got up to start to charge towards my wife and children, I got hit and I immediately fell down. And it felt like someone opened a faucet on my head because the blood just started gushing out. And I put my hand on my head. I could feel the flap of my skin. And when I looked at my hand, it was completely covered in blood, in red. And as I fell down, I yelled, I'm hit, need help, but no one could help me. It wasn't possible because there were bullets everywhere. People couldn't even get up. On the right of me was a man crouching over his wife, protecting her with his hand hunched over like this. He was motionless, but all I could see was blood dripping from a drip, drip, drip. On the left of me, probably a mere 2 meters, if at that, there were two people, clearly shot, clearly dead. One of whom you could see body parts strewn. Just immediately to the right of me, there was this amazing elderly couple, and the husband gave me his shirt to use to help cover my blood. But that whole time, my only thought was my wife and children. It was about 10 minutes before I heard from them. I tried to call my wife. I couldn't reach her. I then took a picture of myself. And this is the one that has now since gone somewhat viral worldwide, which actually a friend had posted. It wasn't even me, but I took the picture for two reasons, David. One, it was to see how badly I was hit. And number two, there was a last picture I sent my wife with the words, love you, not knowing if those would be the last two words she'd hear from me. I then heard from her maybe 5 or so minutes after that saying, we're safe. I'm with the kids, we're safe. They'd managed to escape onto the beach. In hindsight, they would have ran right past me, not knowing that I was in that spot, obviously, and not knowing that around them were bodies, and they would have been right in the line of sight of fire of the shooter. After I heard from them, David, I did something I wasn't quite expecting to do. Now, I'm not the most necessarily religious of Jews, though very proudly, unapologetically Jewish to my very core. And it was only afterwards that I recalled this, but I started reciting the Shema. Now, you know, and for those of your readers that don't know, perhaps, you know, it's one of the most fundamental prayers of the Jewish people as a testament to, you know, to God, to the Almighty. And those, I didn't know why I uttered those words, why I felt compelled to do so. Perhaps it was the knowledge that my wife and kids were safe, not knowing how bad I was truly hit. It was only afterwards the doctors had told me that it was millimeters between life and death for me. The bullet grazed my head to the bone. Their very words, it was a miracle. So there are a lot of questions. I don't always have a lot of answers, and I'm like so many still trying to absorb what happened and piece it together. But what I do know, and you asked me in the beginning, how am I? I'm alive. And that wasn't a guarantee maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, but I'm alive. I have a second chance at life, a chance to embrace my family, my loved ones, and a chance to be an even more passionate advocate for our people and against this evil scourge of anti-Semitism and hatred and violence that we have been the relentless recipients of. So this is where I am. We can't change what happened. It happened, but we can only learn from it and choose how we want to move on.
Arsen, incredibly powerful. I've got dozens of questions. We don't have dozens of minutes. But let me begin by asking you, was there adequate security? I mean, obviously there wasn't. But today, when 1,000 Jews gather anywhere in the world, one presumes that there is going to be appropriate security. Was there? Was there public? Was there private security? And what happened to them?
So it's clearly questions that are being looked into. Obviously, those on a governmental level, obviously this was a massive intelligence failure. The shooters, one of whom was known to the government.
They were father and son. Is that?
It was a father and son. Yes. So at least one of them was known. They traveled abroad to a place like Philippines. And so there's a lot of questions that are being asked right now in terms of the intelligence failure on a governmental level. On the day itself, the Jewish community here, like so many around the world, have our own communal security, who are absolutely incredible. They stand guard at every Jewish event, at every school, Jewish properties, because this is what it's like living as a Jew in 2025 or 2026 in so many parts of the diaspora. And these are amazing men and women, and they were guarding the entire festival, but they were unarmed. There were also a number of police officers. I don't recall how many exactly, obviously an inadequate amount. The police officers that I saw, and as well as the CSG, the Communal Security Group, were absolute heroes, the ones that were there, because even without weapons, they're facing terrorists with rifles, machine guns, snipers. There's only so much you can do either without a weapon, or even if you're a police, you can do it with a pistol. So, what I saw was the police officers and the CSG people risking their own lives, putting their bodies in front to take people away from harm's way, from the line of fire. I saw in one instance a police officer shielding someone with their hand, whilst their other hand was on the pistol, trying to shoot back at the terrorists. So the ones that were there were absolute heroes and did as much as they humanly could have possibly done under the circumstances. But of course, there'll be a lot of questions moving forward, including should the communal security groups be armed? Should there be more police? I can tell you now, across every synagogue, Jewish institution, there is so much police, so much security, the likes of which I've never seen before in my life.
And Arsen, am I correct in saying that there were 4 people from among the crowd that personally tried to stop the 2 shooters? We know about the gentleman, Ahmed, I believe. There's viral video of him grabbing the shooter. There were 3 other people, including a Jewish couple, perhaps originally from the Soviet Union, just judging by their name. Yeah. 3 people who were killed in the process of trying to stop the shooting. Is that correct?
Correct. Plus, 4th one also was an Israeli man who also tried to tackle the shooter. These were stories of absolute heroism.
But the Israeli survived, or the Israeli was killed?
He is alive. He's still.
So 3 people were killed.
In a critical. At least 3 people were
killed in the process of trying to stop the 2 shooters. One is in critical condition, and one, Ahmed, is now. He was hospitalized briefly, or?
He was. He is now out, and obviously an absolute hero. It was the Jewish couple, husband and wife, who were from the former Soviet Union, who were walking past along the street when the terrorists pulled out of their car with the ISIS flag ready there with the guns. And, this is a couple, I believe they were maybe in their 60s perhaps, with nothing on them. Just their bare hands, a man and a wife, try to take down the terrorist. And they were the first ones that tried to approach him. They were shot. There were other stories of absolute heroism. There was a man by the name of Reuven who had nothing but a brick. And there's this image of him throwing a brick at one of the terrorists because that's all he could pick up, all he had on him to try and stop him. And in doing so, he got shot. Every little act of heroism like that, even if it was for a split second, saved lives. Because the moment, for the seconds that it took the attention from the shooter or shooters, it saved lives. It allowed someone to flee. It allowed someone to duck. It allowed someone to get under cover. So there's just absolute stories of heroism. And it wasn't just the ones that obviously lost their lives tragically, but everyday Australians, David, that they chose to run towards the danger, from surf lifesavers to a nurse across the street who came to my aid to give me an IV drip. There was a surfer who tried to tear his clothes off or his shirt to give to me as well, as a tourniquet. So the stories of absolute humanity and heroism, which is what I think so many of us try and take out of this.
And we need to remember those stories. I need to tell JBS viewers that that picture that Arsen referred to of himself, the selfie you took, perhaps as your last picture to your wife, not knowing if you would survive, was a picture that I posted on my social media platform. And I was appalled at the number of people who tried to question both the authenticity of the picture and your own motives as well for posting that picture. I'm sure you're aware of that effort to try and, if you will, delegitimize the whole story. Were you shocked by that?
I'd like to say that I was. First of all, I should say I wasn't the one that posted the picture. I'd sent the picture to a friend who had been inquiring as to how I was later on in the day. Look, we are dealing in a new world of information warfare, which is dark, which is vicious, and which is deadly. And now I've been dealing with this.
Dishonest.
It is incredibly dishonest and fraudulent. I've been dealing with this in the broader context of combating anti-Semitism, of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and certainly in the last 2 years since October 7th, what's happening in Gaza. But I didn't expect to be on the receiving end of this. And this fake AI campaign that came out within probably hours, if at that, saying that I was some kind of crisis actor, and they made up an image with people giving makeup, which wasn't even me, but was meant to resemble me. Now, David, I got these images. I first became aware of them as I was just about to be wheeled into the operating theatre for surgery to remove some of the shrapnel still lodged in my head. That's when I first became aware of these images. And, it's on the one hand, I do not want to dignify this sick, twisted campaign of lies and hate with a response. But I would just say, on the other hand, that words matter. We have seen what happens when lies spread, when hateful words go unchecked. When misinformation and disinformation is allowed to spread, this has real life consequences. We saw that in December 14th, and we see that time and time again. Words and hate left unchecked lead to violence, and we saw this deadly manifestation on December 14th. And it does also pose serious questions about the role of social media companies that allow this kind of purposeful misinformation and disinformation and lies to spread. What role do they have in terms of, on the one hand, stopping this, how they work with algorithms, how they monitor this, how they remove this, and how they deal with those individuals, whether they be whether they be in fact individuals or state parties, which we don't know for sure the case here, how they deal with that as well. So there's a lot of questions that need to be asked, and we certainly will be asking them.
Arsen, I don't mean to give short shrift to the next two topics, but we don't have as much time left as I would wish, because both are very important. But I need to ask, your two daughters just experienced in Israel over 2 years or more of their young lives, probably daily trips to the bomb shelters. And I suspect that in moving to Australia, they were led to believe that if nothing else, there would be no more bomb shelters in their lives. How have they dealt with this crisis, especially as it so directly affected their father?
You know, before we moved here, and when we told our daughters that we would be relocating to Australia, my oldest, who was then a little more than 8 years old and has seen more than any 8-year-old ought to ever see living in Israel, certainly since October 7th, she looked at me and asked, only in those puppy-like eyes that an 8-year-old daughter can, Abba, Dad, does that mean no more boomies?
Boomies.
Meaning no more rockets, no more missiles, no more sirens, no more running to the bomb shelter. And I said, no, sweetie, no more boomies. We're going to Australia, and that's a long way away from the boomies. I lied. It certainly wasn't my intention, but it wasn't the truth. And we didn't expect this. But it is the reality. And it's something that's incredibly painful, obviously, as a father, as a parent. Your number one duty is to shield your children and your family. But they are also incredibly resilient, as their mother is, my wife, who shielded our children with her own body and then took them to shelter. And as far as I'm concerned, you know, she is the incredible lioness in the family. So my kids will be okay. They have dealt with extraordinary circumstances the last 2 years, but it is confronting when it's your own father, when these images are out, when obviously I'm in the hospital away from them, but we're taking every day as it comes.
Arsen, and the last topic, Australia, which I have visited on so many occasions, was always, in a way, a kind of second promised land for the Jewish people. The Jewish communities in Sydney and Melbourne and elsewhere in the country were quite extraordinary, felt very much at home, very safe, very much part of the fabric. What's happened? Again, this is a much longer discussion, but there is a context for this. This did not just happen out of the blue. Isn't that correct?
Yeah. Look, you're 100% right. You know, this didn't come out of the blue. This didn't happen in a vacuum. Australia was once, certainly the Australia that I grew up in and that with my family found refuge in after this former Soviet Union, was an absolute beacon and oasis of peace as a country, for a country as a whole, but also especially for the Jewish community. But we have seen certainly over the last number of years, and especially since October 7th, anti-Semitism explode unabated. You know, only 2 days after the October 7th attacks on October 9th, there was a mob that descended on Sydney Opera House, another, you know, iconic landmark of Australia, and they began chanting, some are saying, whether gas the Jews or where are the Jews, as if one is somehow better or worse. They're both horribly unacceptable. And we have seen this continue on a weekly, daily basis. Synagogues firebombed, chants to globalize the Intifada on the streets, schools attacked, Jewish businesses being defaced. The Jewish community has warned the government time and time and time again that if this hatred is allowed and it continues to be excused, mainstreamed, justified, or ignored, this will result in violence, and we saw this deadly manifestation.
And Arsen, not to interrupt you, but the government has a name. It's not just the government, it has a prime minister. His name is Anthony Albanese, and the team that he has assembled. What can we expect from them after December 14th, given what they failed to do until December 14th?
I tell you what we ought to have expected, and unfortunately, what we did not receive. Ultimately, as the Prime Minister of the country, you are the one responsible. You are the leader. The buck stops with you. At its most basic, the community would have expected empathy, humanity, compassion. We did not receive any of that. The Prime Minister certainly has not.
Why?
That's a good question. I think there's this absolute cold indifference to the plight of the Jewish community. The Prime Minister has not called me up. He has not, as I understand, he has not spoken to any of the survivors. He visited Ahmed Al-Ahmed, the hero, as he absolutely should have, but he should have been there at every single hospital bed of every single survivor, and he should have been at every single funeral. He did not go to a single funeral. He did not see a single survivor apart from Ahmed in hospital. The Prime Minister had on his desk for over half a year, I believe now, a report from the Special Envoy for Combating Anti-Semitism, the very special envoy that he himself appointed, with a report with some 20 plus recommendations, none of which were implemented. Even now, when discussion is moving on, how do we move forward? In other words, how do we learn from the tragedy of December 14th to ensure that does not repeat? There is now this is where the conversation is in terms of how we learn from that, because obviously we have to learn from the past in order to ensure that these kinds of mistakes and tragedies are not repeated. And the Prime Minister Albanese, is again refusing to listen not only to the survivors and the victims' families, but to the absolute groundswell of opinion from across the country, including business leaders, security professionals, sports leaders, faith leaders, calling for a royal commission into this. And for your viewers, a royal commission, it's the highest possible investigation that a Commonwealth, the government, can actually have, which has basically open powers to investigate everything related to this. The Prime Minister,
and it requires the okay of the Prime Minister.
Yes. Now, what the Prime Minister did was he said that he would hold a review looking into the intelligence failures that led to this. Now, with all due respect, this is not merely an intelligence failure. This is a wholesale failure of leadership. This is a failure to listen to our warnings. This is a failure across government policy for fueling some of this fire with some of the policies in the Middle East and singling Israel out for opprobrium and discrimination. It is a failure in our institutions. It's a failure on campuses. So it is not merely an intelligence failure, although it is, but it's a failure of leadership from across the board. And we need to know not only what happened, but how it was allowed to happen in order to ensure that it does not happen again.
And Arsen, in our remaining minute or so, does he, the Prime Minister, represent this new notion in some Western nations of the Red-Green Alliance, which leaves the Jews marginalized because they're not consequential to this political marriage between the Reds, the left wing, and the Greens, not the Muslims, but the Islamists within the Muslim population?
If you'd asked me this before December 14th, I would have said that is squarely where he was, and perhaps ideologically still is. But something changed on December 14th, David, and this is what gives me hope. It wasn't just the heroism and the humanity of those who risked their own lives to save us, but it has been the way the community, not just the Jewish community, but the broader community, has come together. And I think now understand that anti-Semitism, this virus of Jew hatred, is not merely a Jewish problem, but it is an Australian problem. The terrorists, came shooting on that Hanukkah festival, targeting us for one reason and one reason only, because we are Jews. But it was an assault on the very social fabric of Australia. And we have seen now across the spectrum, especially non-Jews, coming together, from business leaders, sports leaders, security intelligence leaders, lawyers, coming together, understanding that this is not merely just an issue for our community. That an attack on any minority is an attack on our nation and our values of that we pride and cherish, of tolerance, freedom, respect, dignity of life. So we're seeing so many non-Jews coming out now, standing with us in solidarity, and that's something that does give me a tremendous amount of hope, notwithstanding the very unfortunate actions of the government itself.
Arsen, I wish we had lots more time. We're just getting started, but our time is up. With huge thanks to you, given what you've been through in recent weeks especially, for coming on the show. Thank you. I hope you continue to heal both physically and emotionally. JBS viewers, you've been listening to Arsen Ostrovsky, a stalwart ambassador, advocate, and I would say hero of the Jewish people, and what happened to him on December the 14th in Bondi Beach and what's happened since. We can only hope that the Prime Minister of Australia himself will be listening to this show and maybe taking some lessons from what Arsen has told us. JBS viewers, I'm David Harris. This is Defending Israel, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.